Welcome to the No Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
And sitting in for Tim?
It's Grant the Beat Bosnick here, sitting in for Tim Wade here. I'm an author here, new book coming out here. Already came out a couple months. Tailored approaches to self-leadership. I'm also a team effectiveness coach as well, too. Great to be here, and thanks for having me.
At this point, I was going to make some kind of spontaneous comment about how good he was, and that's why we brought him back, but he goofed up the intro, so I don't know what to do now.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I'm Joe Augustine, and welcome to the No Show, a show that's trying to help people really be able to go around and go like, I really know what's going on. I understand what's happening in the world. We don't, of course, cover every single thing in just the 1 hour that we have. But we try to put you in the know so that you can have more meaningful conversations, perhaps about the world and everything else. We also have with us a special guest. Not only, of course, is Grant with us as an extra point of view, but we also have today someone that we're very thrilled to have. We're thrilled that Bavani Periasamy has agreed to join us this week. And it's hot off the back of the Malaysian elections. Bavani is going to be making some comments about that. Bavani is a gratitude advocate. Apparently someone that I should be speaking to regarding gratitude. Bavani helps leaders build an appreciative work culture to improve productivity. Bavani, welcome.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me here today.
It's great to have you, darling. So do you want to just let everyone know a little bit more about what you do?
I love the topic gratitude simply because it made a big change in my life. 10 years ago, believe it or not, I was sitting outside a hall doing registration for conference. Never did I know that one day I'll be a speaker myself. And that's all because of gratitude. So I'm passionate about it, and I'm an author in the making. So something's coming up very soon on that. And that's just something about me, the gratitude advocate.
Nice.
So we have a format here, a show where we try to get through as much of the news as possible, and we're giving ourselves a time limit as well, because this show started off as a short show, began to become a very, very long show, and now we're saying, okay, let's get back to the short and sweet. So we have slightly less than half an hour to get through as much of the world news as possible. Shall we get to it?
Sure. So one of the big news stories that broke this week was, of course, the death of Christine McVie, who was a former singer-songwriter for Fleetwood Mac. She died at the age of 79. I'm seeing a lot of people say gone too soon. Our idea of gone too soon seems to have extended over the decades, don't you think? But anyway, so we saw our social media feeds flooded with news of her death. And of course, she's a big loss for the music industry. Grant, I'm sure you would agree with that.
Indeed, yeah.
A big story in the climate that I really wanted to put out there. It's not a good story. One of the titles, it's in phys.org, so phys.org. I recommend everyone follows it. Climate change will clearly disrupt El Nino and La Nina this decade, 40 years earlier than we thought. And these 40 years earlier, 50 years earlier, 80, 90 years earlier statements are coming through thick and fast, of course, and it's as the scientists catch up with all of the various amounts of data. It's such a complex issue, but I hope that we're all aware of La Nina and El Nino, and we're now in our third La Nina period. And La Nina is the cause of all of the heavy flooding and rain that we're seeing, especially in southeastern Australia. And I was stuck in one of the big storms there, one of the big flooding events there back in October. But basically, when it goes to El Nino, then that's when the drought conditions are experienced in Australia. And growing up in Australia, drought is part of life. But this is the two together, El Nino and La Nina, are called the El Nino Southern Oscillation. And it's the strongest and most consequential factor driving Earth's weather. And the droughts that we're seeing, the crazy droughts that we're seeing around the world, the crazy weather events that we're seeing around the world are all being linked to this. And so basically what they're saying is by 2030, which is just in 8 years' time, 7 years' time? Yeah, from next year, 7 years' time, right? And Australians need to get prepared for these extreme weather conditions. So to my family and my friends in Australia, this is a real time to partner with governments to get the action happening to protect people, because this is coming. Another publication, Arctic News, have said El Nino is expected, so this is when it gets hot and dry, to coincide with a peak in sunspots. And this looks set to reach higher than expected maximum impact around July 2025. So by 2024, we're going to start to see 1.5 sort of emerging. It's not going to be embedded, but it's coming. And the impact of this upcoming El Nino could make a difference of more than 0.5 degrees C global warming. Now, the world is currently at 1.2, so that's 1.7. Is that right? Have I got my maths right? But Australia apparently is already at 1.4 degrees plus global warming. So 0.5 is going to have a massive impact on the country. Some of the headlines to look out for in my weekend reads: extreme weather to strike Australia decades earlier than predicted. Another one, the Great Deluge, Australia's new era of unnatural disasters. And the third one, and I'm sorry, but I have to swear, Australia is fucked. So, Joe, you were surprised many years ago when I said to you, Australia isn't a country that I'm looking at to return to because of climate change. And it appears that I was correct. Don't want to be correct, but there we go. So,
Right.
Grant.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea, for that as well too. And then in other news as well too, in the Ukraine war, Putin tells Russian soldier mothers that he shares their pain. So in Russia, Putin staged a meeting with mothers of Russian soldiers that have been killed, and it's been receiving cynical media coverage as several of the mothers are members of pro-Kremlin movements. Critics say that they were carefully chosen for this meeting. And within Russia itself, opposition to the invasion of Ukraine has been growing across social media, and across the country, groups of mothers of serving soldiers have been openly complaining that their sons are being sent into battle, poorly trained and without adequate weapons and clothing, especially as a bitterly cold winter sets in. So some have also accused the Russian military of turning those forcefully deployed into cannon fodder following a string of heavily military defeats in recent months. So it's not a good scene there for the mothers of these children, it seems here. In other news, Irene Cara, maybe you remember her from 1980s Fame, and then wrote the song. Yeah, it's a gut of feeling. That was from Flashdance, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Came out a few years after that. So she died at the age of 63. Another loss in the music legend this week here. The American singer and actor is best known for the title track in the 1980 film Fame, as well as co-writing and singing the smash hit Flashdance, What a Feeling, won an Oscar and a Grammy for that. So definitely she'll be missed for that here. What a Feeling from 1983 was won the Grammy Award for Best Female Pop Vocal Performance, as well as the Academy Award for Best Original Song. So I think I'm going to watch that again this weekend. Probably, maybe Fame even.
Yeah, she was definitely a voice of my youth. Has anyone heard how she died? Because that was not being shared there initially. Has anyone seen anything more on it? No.
No.
All right. So over to Bavani and a bit of a focus on Malaysia. So I just hand on heart, I haven't had time to track what's going on in Malaysia. The only thing I did notice was all of my friends posting their purple fingers, or was it blue fingers? Is it purple?
It's supposed to be a blue dye, but it sort of turns into a purple hue after a few days. So I've just got
You still got a bit?
I'm sorry to show my finger, but I've just got a little bit at my tip right now.
Yeah, it's funny. There's not many countries that that do that, and it was just really interesting seeing Facebook flooded with mates with their purple fingers. But sorry, Anwar's back in. And we know that he's got a pretty interesting story. So is it good? Is it bad? Is it what do you feel? What's the sentiment?
So Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, and I'll just call him Anwar after this, has been sworn in as our Prime Minister, the 10th Prime Minister, I think just a week ago. And Andrea, as we speak right now, we are all anxiously waiting for the announcement of the cabinet and not the IKEA ones. So yeah, that's really something that we are looking forward to, because what happened was none of the parties actually had a major seat. So any party who should take lead needs to have at least 112 seats, and the highest that Anwar's coalition had was 80 plus. So this is the interesting part. They had to join forces with another party known as Barisan Nasional, which was the former government in before 2018. So it's really interesting to notice that the very team that they were bashing up and saying, we need them out, we need to clean up, we need to reform. And that's the coalition that's working together right now to form the current unity government. So it's a lot of question marks. It's everyone is just anxious to see where this is going to head towards too.
Yeah. Was it expected?
Not really, because there were some surprising losses. That includes the former Prime Minister Tun Mahathir, who not only lost his seat, but he actually lost his deposit, the election deposit, and which means that he lost, you need to have at least a 1/8 winning to secure your
You need
deposit.
a
So
12.5% voted. Yeah.
correct. So he lost his deposit, he lost his seat. His son, Mukris Mahathir, also lost his seat. And two other prominent people, Khairi Jamaluddin, which was the former health minister, lost his seat. And Nurul Izzah, which is the current Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's daughter, she lost a seat as well. And those are some of the surprising losses that we witnessed just on 19 November. So, and a lot of people are saying that's because they introduced the Vote 18, or in Malay it's known as Undi 18. What it means is 18 years and above, you can start voting. So I think there was some surprises there, according to the political analysts that I've been listening to. So not sure what really happened there. And also because there was an anti-hopping law introduced recently. So people who want seats need to stay within their party. They can't jump. So that really makes up to a lot of interesting things that we are witnessing right now. Who knows what's to come?
Yeah. But basically, Malaysian political royalty have been ousted, right?
In many ways, yes. While everyone has been waiting, or many, I should say, has been waiting for Anwar to be the prime minister, well, it finally happened after, 2 decades?
Yeah.
It finally happened this time.
Vindication, do you think, for what he had to go through?
In many ways, yes, I would think so. But then there would be a lot who would turn around and say that no, he's still guilty. So yeah, there's still many sentiments. Not to mention there is some racial tensions that's going on, because Anwar is promoting a unity community, unity among racial ethnicities within, whereas the other party, Perikatan Nasional, is a bit more Islam oriented. So there is some unspoken tension that's going around.
Right. So the division's still there, right?
Yes and no. They may not admit it, but kind of yes, yeah. If you ask me. Trying to be very, very diplomatic in my answers here.
Well,
Absolutely.
what I'll do is I'll jump in as a still Malaysian myself and say that the politics at least now is trying to face in a more I would say inclusive direction. But the ground and the sea upon which the boat is on is still kind of going in all directions. People are there's a bit of turbulence while there's a desire to move forward. From a stock market's point of view, though, that the stock market really has said, okay, it's not so confusing after all, and it had, I think, the best day it's had in years.
Yes, I think
in recovery.
Right after Anwar was announced as prime minister, the market prices went up because it was going down the week before that, and the ringgit has strengthened a little right after Anwar took his seat as a prime minister.
So we were talking about demographics last week. So it sounds like this might be another case of, the youth votes, Gen Z and millennials coming out. So before the voting age was older than 18?
21 and above.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right.
21 and
Yeah.
above.
So that's
I
smart.
think
bringing
the
youth
surprises
voting.
that they're talking about, Andrea, were like when you expect that the younger vote is going to vote a certain way, and they didn't quite vote that certain way. They had their own views of things. I think one of the things you had in Malaysia is you had an older demographic that was sick and tired of corruption, and you had a younger demographic who didn't really have much to think about that, and so they voted along different lines. So it did shift it completely, because had it stayed completely on the lines of corruption and moving out and maybe the older audience only, I think the prediction would have been a much bigger swing towards the opposition this time round.
Correct. I think Joe hit it right on the spot saying that.
Yeah, look, I wish your country well. I've always been a big fan of Malaysia. So, all right, Joe, we've got some China stuff going on. Lots and lots of China stuff going on.
Well, as you know, in China, they've been working very hard on having the zero COVID policy, right? So that if let's say you happen to be in the middle of IKEA and someone sneezes, and then they take a test, because they do that, and they figure out that you have COVID, the whole place gets locked down. No one gets to leave that place, and it can get bigger and bigger as well. As in, like, if enough is happening in a city, the entire city gets locked down. And so China has this zero COVID policy. If there is a breakout, we're going to lock down, and to very, very extreme extents as well. People are sometimes welded, their gates are welded shut, so they can't leave their house as well, to enforce these lockdowns. They have had some good consequences as well as bad. A lot of people just look at China and say, okay, it's a very draconian situation. But the flip side of it has been that when things are good, they're kind of really good. Because when COVID was first breaking out in the rest of the world, I was doing some work with the universities in China as well. And I was actually quite surprised to find that as I was dealing with all these people in their offices and all, they didn't have masks on. They didn't have to have masks on because there was zero COVID. But this policy, people have said, it's impractical, can't fully work. The economic cost is high, the social cost is high. And what kind of happened to China, or happened in China, was the World Cup. So it seems like, the big unifying sport, the world's coming together. It's a nice distraction. Let's watch football. But when you're in a country where there are lockdowns, and when you watch football and you see the fans of all the countries in the world get together in a place without masks, you kind of go like, wait, what's going on there? And it's sort of started off something. A lot of people just want to blame the World Cup for that, but it isn't actually the World Cup for that. It's a kind of having a social proof situation, right? Because if you it's one thing to do things in your part of the world your way, and you think everybody else is kind of doing the same thing as well, until you see some proof that that's really not the way it works. And I think enough people have come together to launch protests. And what I mean by enough is so many people that the usual crackdowns that you would kind of expect for protests in China did not launch. Because I don't think this time around the protests were specifically a particular younger demographic of students, or it wasn't a minority. It didn't seem like it represented a minority. It was a more widespread sentiment. And so China has, in a sense, released its grip on zero COVID, and has kind of begun to signal an easing up of that policy. This is actually a bit of a sea change for China. Actually, it's actually very rare that any kind of policy is pushed back against successfully by any kind of group of people. But in this case, it seems to be enough of a group of people that they're saying, you know what, maybe we can't hold this dam in anymore. They do have some significant challenges to face, though, because China's been vaccinated only with the Sinovac vaccine, and that actually has been shown to be less effective against the Omicron variant, especially. And that's what we're facing right now. We've gone into bivalent mRNA vaccines, and they still have that original vaccine. So what happens is they have, first of all, a less than well, not want to say less than it's a less effective vaccine that has been used, and they also have very large numbers of old people who have not been vaccinated as well.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where the zero COVID policy actually allowed a lot of older people not to be vaccinated, and so it was okay for them. And now, if you have this big dam that's opened up, and if you don't have a zero COVID policy, then these older people who are not vaccinated are now going to be at risk. So it's not going to be a pleasant time, because if you think about what's going to happen just from a numbers point of view, mathematical modeling point of view, China is looking at some very big numbers of older people who are going to pay the price for the opening up of this policy.
Yeah, just one other thing that was one of the other reasons before the World Cup, there was a fire in one of the buildings, the apartment buildings where people were locked up.
Yeah.
And initial protests were actually linked to that, and just people, because the people couldn't get out and they died because of the fire. So that was another big issue. But yeah, sorry, go back.
No, it's all the building up. It's one after the other, one after the other, one after the other. I would say that what you had is all these different stories packed up together. And I say World Cup was the thing that's universal enough that they went, the rest of the world isn't doing this. Why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Right. The next bit is about how the world's recognizing that China's leaders don't want to follow Russia's lead in terms of diplomacy, or at least how things are going in the world. And I kind of saw something very interesting about this, the whole thing. China is engaging more with the world. Their ambassadors are saying hello. They're having long conversations with the US as well. They're recognizing in their speeches that we need to get along and all that kind of stuff. And what I found interesting about this was actually, if this a very cynical thought in my head that this was some kind of an experiment, where the elder brother pushes down the younger brother into a dangerous place, and so you go and see what it's like in that part of the world. And then it didn't quite work out for the younger brother, so now the elder brother goes like, yeah, I think I won't do that.
Yeah.
Because if you remember the early stages of the Russian invasion, were pretty much along the lines of there was some kind of cooperation almost, if you look at it back to the Olympics, right? They didn't want to disrupt the Olympics, and so everything was nice and uncluttered. And it was only after that the whole Russian stuff worked. It almost seemed coordinated, almost seemed like Russia and China were making sure that things didn't overlap. Like two big companies who said, we won't let our PR kind of drown each other off. And if you looked at what Putin was doing in the early days, you would have almost sworn that you could have seen the arm or the hand of China on the shoulder, just saying, yeah, go ahead, go keep doing this. And it's kind of changed now that it's turned out that way. So I think what China did, and it's a bit of a lesson that I thought that because Singapore's always been, or Lee Kuan Yew has always been seen as a bit of a mentor to the Chinese leaders in terms of ideas of how things are done, soft power and all that kind of stuff, right? It's very Singaporean to let someone else try something first, see how it goes, and if it works out, we might go and do that. So I think China kind of let Russia try something out and took some lessons away about how they might approach the Taiwan situation. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Yeah.
The last bit of really big news this week for me was the Alzheimer's drug, lecanemab. This you may have heard something about an Alzheimer's drug and why it's important and all that. Just to give you some background, Alzheimer's is the leading cause of dementia, and dementia itself actually costs the world a lot of money. I think in 2018 it cost the world $1.3 trillion, and by 2030 we're expecting it to get to $2.6 trillion. It's very expensive, and Alzheimer's is responsible for about 3 to 4 out of every 5 cases of dementia. And for the longest time, there have been pushes towards trying to sort out or solve, or from a drugs point of view anyway, to try and work on Alzheimer's. Nothing really has been working. Nothing promising came along until lecanemab showed up. Now, it was only an 18-month trial, and from that, they found a limited kind of response to the drug in the sense that there was a slowing down of the progression of the disease by about a quarter. Now, all these numbers seem like they don't make a real big difference, but the significance of some of these changes, if they can play out in the bigger picture, is this: if you are able to slow down dementia, slow down Alzheimer's just by 5 years, and that seems like not very much time in the grand span of things, you actually reduce the occurrence of that disease by half. And that is a tremendous difference. Now, the interesting thing about this particular area is that it is such a big and a problem to try and solve, that there's been all kinds of things that happen in the background, scandals along the way about medical trials that were perhaps fudged because there was so much at stake. But the hopes are high that this is going to work. Lecanemab works on something called the amyloids, which is a kind of a deposit that's in the brains, and it's for the longest time, amyloids were always seen as the great big suspicious sort of character looming in the world of Alzheimer's. And what happens in people who have Alzheimer's is that from early on in their lives, they actually begin to get a little bit of the amyloid deposits building up. And towards the end or the higher or the later part of the disease, things really collapse very quickly. And this particular drug actually is working on that and trying to work on removing removing the amyloids. But yeah, it's a momentous time. There's also one new study which I just want to mention very quickly, which is actually working on early onset Alzheimer's for people, because they realize that Alzheimer's is linked to genetics, and if young people who have this particular genetic mutation get the treatment, they may be completely cured or might have the outcomes extremely changed by this. So it is big news, because it's the equivalent really of it's almost like a drug that cures the cancer of the personality. If you think about dementia, what it does is it robs you of who you are, and if you can try and stop that, save that, prevent that, it is such a valuable thing.
Yeah, wow,
Wonderful.
it's great news. So I'll just go through quickly. So we've spoken about the rise of hardliners in Russia, and it seems that they're on the rise and their power is going. There's a guy. I'm not going to be able to say his name correctly in Russian, but it's Prigozhin. Anyone else have a
Prigozhin.
Prigozhin. There you go.
Prigozhin.
But anyway, sort of.
I have no idea.
He's seen as behind the scenes, and a lot of top military commanders have been removed because of him. He's been going after a prominent Putin ally, the mayor of St. Petersburg, and this is a real concern, because if hardliners get control, then we're really going to be seeing, a Stalinist sort of type of repression in the country. And a lot of the wealthy people are very, very concerned about the safety for themselves and their families. So we've got a long way to go before we see the end of this. Grant?
Yeah. Just two other things from me here as well. I mean, as we know, it's been in Europe, one of the record heat waves on one of the biggest heat waves and the hottest heat waves on record in Europe, across several countries, hitting record temperatures. And recent studies now have been showing that this record-breaking heat that's happening in Europe has been experienced in the past years, expected to be the average by 2035. So that's pretty close by now. That's like about 12, 13 years from now here. That's going to, or maybe, what did I say, 2023, about 12 years, 12 years from now or so. And it's not that far. That's going to be the average summer. So we're driving such dramatic change in the environment, which is going to have a massive implication on how we live, farm more, and how we function every day. So the future's not looking good. And it's something that does have to be addressed and changed. We have to bring these temperatures down here and do something about this. Otherwise, we will be heating up this planet, and heat waves will be the norm. In other news as well, too, Very interesting when Jacinda Ardern and Sanna Marin, the prime ministers of New Zealand and Finland, respectively, when they had met here, that there was a very interesting comment that was made. One of the journalists had said, "Are you meeting because you share things in common and about the same age and other things that you may have in common?" And to which Jacinda Ardern then replied here that, did anybody ever ask Obama that question? Are you meeting others because you are the same age? Or as Joe Biden, this is just because we are women does not mean we are meeting because we're women. And then to that, Sanna Marin, the Prime Minister of Finland, said, "We're meeting because we are prime ministers."
Mm-hmm.
So,
Girl power.
drop the microphone,
Yeah,
it's like, well, they put that journalist in his place,
Stupid sexist comments happen all the time. It's so ridiculous. Anyway,
Isn't it?
boring.
And by the way, both amazing prime ministers in their own rights, too.
And they handled the moment very well.
Indeed.
All right, some exciting news all the way from United Kingdom. Now, Leonardo DiCaprio, who is an UN climate change representative, actually lauded the birth of a bison calf in Canterbury. Now, this is an interesting piece of news because the only contribution Leonardo DiCaprio made is talking about it on Instagram. I suppose that would get some eyeballs because he is who he is. Anyway, it's a very cool story. And imagine this, in thousands of years, this is the first bison calf to be there. So thousands of years, it's just not like decades, it's thousands of years. That's definitely a story of hope. Now, moving on to another story, which is not so pleasing, at least to me it is not. In Fast Company, titled, "Can we finally kill off cheap, disposable conference swag?" And to that, I say, yes, please. Now, conference swag is a $64 billion industry, and as brands are buying it on a fixed budget, most swag makers sell low-price, low-quality items in bulk. There's mounting evidence that most of these goods quickly end up in the trash, but you don't need data to know this. How many times have you chucked out a free calendar, a thumb drive that has been shoved to you? I suppose most of us have, or many of us have done that. Every time, straight away. There's just so much of waste in that. So with that, that's all from me. Andrea, back to you.
Yeah. Right. So let's get on to the theme. Human rights negotiable. So I thought that this would be a really interesting topic for us to just sort of pull apart a little bit, because all of us have lived and worked and wandered around the world, probably more than most people on average. And we know that human rights are not equal everywhere you go, right? So let's start with the definition of what human rights are. So according to the UN, human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. Human rights include the right to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion and expression, the right to work and education, and many more. Everyone is entitled to these rights without discrimination. And of course, at the FIFA World Cup, we've seen that human rights, especially in regards to the LGBTQIA plus community, have been on the table. The German team were photographed with their mouths covered after being told they couldn't wear the One Love armbands, and that was from FIFA. So FIFA's sort of really in the spotlight. But, there's lots of layers to all stories. It's easy to have one opinion, but there's always so many things to consider. And the Middle East, of course, are taking a very different approach and have a different attitude to this story. However, while I absolutely 100% support this action, the other side is the deaths and the suffering of migrant workers who built the stadiums and the hotels. And there's many articles talking about what they've gone through and how unfairly they've been treated. And I would have thought that would have been the biggest story that the teams wanted to get behind. So I'm pleased that they got behind that issue, but there's this other issue. And it's almost disappointing that that's not the bigger issue for me, because that is a community that definitely has no voice in the world. And we all over the region, we see how migrant workers are treated. And then, of course, all the other side, going to Singapore this week, it was finally official that gay sex is no longer illegal in Singapore, but marriage will not be a right, which has been put into the constitution now. You guys can tell me more. But then just yesterday, I saw that Japan is moving towards equal rights for the LGBTQIA community, and the Tokyo District Court has ruled that there is no law to protect the rights of same-sex couples to marry and become families, and it's violates the Constitution of Japan. And Japan's still a very traditional country, so I thought that was interesting to see that progress being made. So I suppose it's about progress, right? I don't know. What are you guys? What are your takeaways? Whether it's FIFA or the news in Singapore or in Japan, what are your feelings about all of this?
Well, I think the one I want to touch on first of all is FIFA and the migrant workers out there, which I wasn't aware of that myself until just this week when these articles I read them myself here, and there was since they were awarded the contract, 6,500 migrant workers have died. It doesn't say it's not as a result of the World Cup, but when you look at the conditions where they live, the segregation that's in place there for their lifestyle, and some of the harder conditions they need to face. And of course, this is not just there; it is elsewhere around the world too. And I think I want to see, and I just noticed in your definition up there of human rights, it doesn't say anything about safety. And I want to address that issue about health and safety in the workplace. And I think Singapore just released a study recently as well too. Within that 3-month period that they were doing the investigations, there were over 500 infringements within a 3-month period. That's more than 3-4 a day, and half of those are repeat offenders. So I think that there needs to be stronger measures and enforcement globally for health and safety for workers that work in extreme conditions, whether that's heat or dangerous zones.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And the other thing is the way migrant workers have to live around the world. Many of them are in sort of shipping containers, or they're in like just tin shacks, basically. And, looking at this 1.5, 1.7 that's coming our way in the next couple of years, these conditions are too hot to live. And those people are basically going to cook. Yeah. So just, that humanity towards these people.
Well, they work in the heat, then they go live in the heat.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there's
they
no
don't
break.
get out of it. They don't get out of it. There is no shade, there is no cool air.
But I did see a lot of progress in Singapore. But then, of course, in Singapore during the lockdowns, we saw the migrant workers camps. They suffered a lot. But out in the rest of Asia, some of the stuff I'm seeing, I'm extremely concerned for the welfare of this community, and they're not a priority for governments in the region, because it's almost like they're not even regarded as human. And that, I think we need to change that. We need to change this idea of superiority of any race towards another.
Yeah.
Bavani?
Okay, if I could just touch on because Grant said something about safety, and that reminded me of something. I'm not sure how famous this topic is, but we actually have a transgender person by the name of Sajad who had to flee the country because there were court cases on her, because she wore a hijab when she went for prayers, and of course the law went and took action, but she feared for her safety, so she had to flee the country. And while she was one of those who were able to do that, because financially she was able to do it, but the rest are, I think, still living in fear, because they are not openly welcome, they are not openly allowed into some places. So safety in terms of how they are living in fear is I think also something that is dominant quite over here in that sense. And that's just transgender that I'm speaking about. I haven't gone into gay and all of the other areas of society that we have.
Yeah. So interesting. Just across the border in Thailand, the transgender community it's a massive community, and it's a respected part of the community. And then you go across into India, where there's a what's the word? It's a group of people. What's that called in India? and they have a role to play, but they're a really interesting experience. They're called the invisible culture, but they're basically, I remember the first time I saw them, I was sitting having a coffee in Calcutta, and this group of women turned up in saris, and then when I looked, I could see 5 o'clock shadows, and it was really like I'd never seen this community before. And they visit weddings and they have blessings, but there's lots of different opinions of it. But there's a role for these people in their communities, and and then you go to across the border and it's something completely different, or you go to the Philippines, it's something completely different because Catholicism's sort of the dominant religion there. So there's no consistency across this region, but many people are suffering, and I think safety, like you said, safety just to exist, Joe, you often have some strong ideas on these things.
Well, it's always about. I mean, someone was asking me about my views about the world, and they asked me, "Am I a Republican or a Democrat?" And in some ways, I think I'm a bit of a Republican in the sense that I believe in market forces, and I believe in how things kind of settle in a certain way. And I think in terms of opportunity, and I think in terms of sometimes what people get into without realizing they're getting into that. I think that there's a long history in the world of people setting out on quests where things turn out a lot worse than they thought they were. I think a lot of people go as migrant workers, for instance. They get to an agent who's going to say that I'm going to bring you to a place where you can get to work, and they think that's a great opportunity, much better than what they have back home. They look at the whole package and they go like, okay, I feel it's worthwhile as a venture to embark on this and to invest, so that in the first 2 years of my life I'm not going to make any money at all. And they go and they say that that's going to be something that they're willing to do as well. That's their journey. That's what they feel is worth doing. I'm not in any way trying to blame them for it. What I'm saying is, if you have that large group of people willing to do that, that is the supply that meets the demand that comes from the other side. There is going to be a great demand for a workforce, as cheap a workforce as possible. And if you can get that workforce across the border for a lower price, it's going to be fantastic. What is a real shame is that I think what Singapore can do, because Singapore, for instance, is a country that tends to look at market gaps like these and close them up and turn them into government fees, and then be able to do something with it. I mean, I'll give you a few examples, like how COE was handled, how we had this problem with too many cars, too much money under the table, and then we turned it into, okay, well, let's make it a above the table kind of a fee where you compete for the opportunity to own a car. I think that all this money that the agents make, which is way too much money in my opinion, compared to what the wages are, can be turned into fees, into something which can be automated, which can be I think can be wrestled away from these people who are willing to exploit someone else for these huge profits. I mean, the profit per person is about $3,000 to $4,000. If you think about $3,000, $4,000, maybe $5,000 to bring a person across the border, to place them in a situation where they're going to spend the rest of that time paying you back that money. So it is a full profit business as far as the agents are concerned. Whereas it is a completely loss-making situation for the employees who come in, because they not only have to try and earn back that money within this 2-year period if nothing bad happens. If they were to have a bad situation happen, they get transferred or whatever it is, there are additional fees, so they get further and further down this rabbit hole where their debts increase, and the time to kind of sort those debts gets longer and longer as well. So this indentured servants basically are in our midst. The challenge that I think the governments, I won't say governments face, actually, the challenge that the world cares about this faces is that we don't pay much attention to these things. When you talked about how no one noticed, I realized that it's not that we don't know. I think we've always known. We've known these stories for the longest time. We knew about the Middle East and how it's worked for migrant workers for all that time, and it's not something that we couldn't have seen coming. if you knew that, for instance, Qatar was ill prepared for the World Cup. It needed to do all this massive construction, and there was only going to be one way it would be solved: the massive acceleration of development. And it was not going to be for free. There was going to be a price to pay. The world's one of the world's hottest environments, where you had to create that much stuff that soon. They're gonna be some people who can't make it. I mean, unless you spend massive amounts of money on things to make it livable and to protect. Because even in Singapore, the shipbuilding industry here goes through a similar problem, as in the days get very hot. It becomes impossible to work because it's a big oven. Singapore isn't exactly a cool place as well, but at least here we have some safety valves to say, you know what, today's too hot, we are going to stop at this particular time. But when you have a World Cup deadline breathing down your neck, with probably what are massive penalties, the worst possible pun to put in there, but it's massive penalties if you don't make it. The pressure is on. It was always in danger of becoming a very dangerous place.
Well, I think also,
can I just sort of say the money argument sort of doesn't I don't buy it, right? Because we all know it's Qatar, it's oil rich, it's got a lot of money, and they've spent billions and billions and billions on putting this together. Treating their workers with respect and dignity and paying them. And those people in the middle, I've dealt with maid agencies where they do exactly the same thing and in debt their ladies. And any case of that, we've discovered that we're involved with. We just pay that debt off to give the ladies a chance to earn some money, because that's what they're there for, so they can send it home, right? But if you can treat your people with respect and dignity, I mean, you think of the brand damage to Qatar from this event, and if they had have just, they're already spending billions. Just make sure that the money that is being spent is to honor the human beings in the mix. To me, it's not hard. I'm going to raise consciousness, right? It's just it's barbaric.
Yeah. Well, I think I mean, what's a couple of the other articles where we're talking about, the way that workers are treated, and if somebody's yelling at you and threatening to cut your wages, and you're scared about this, well, of course you're going to keep working without water in 40-degree weather, because you're there to get the money. So I think when you're looking at any kind of management or foremen or for people or any kind of supervisors, if this is the mindset of how they're going to treat people, there are laws about working above 30-degree weather. But if your boss is threatening to cut your wages if you don't stop working, well, what are you going to do in the moment? So I mean, it's not just about having those laws in place, because they do exist. It's about having the supervisors and the management actually, care about the people who work there. But they don't.
I think when it comes to survival, people would just do what they need to do to survive. When it's their bread and butter, who's going to talk about pick the laws or the acts and say that this is what's governing our country? They're just going to say, I'll do it because I need the bread and butter.
But how do we drive that change around the world? Because we need to drive that change if we're going to deal with the climate crisis. So respect for our fellow human beings, no matter where they come from. The majority of people that are going to be impacted the most by climate change, of course, apart from Australia, if you think of Australia, right, as a country, the way they have treated refugees for the last 20 years. Now, what happens if Australia needs to pack up and start migrating? Are their neighbours going to take them in and say, we'll take care of you? Or are they going to say, screw you? Look at how you guys treated us, right? We've got to start moving into this place where we have respect for each other, and this sense of superiority. And for me, coming to Asia and living in Asia for 20 years has been, some of the most shocking racism I've ever seen has been between countries, but also between skin colors within countries. Browner skin is lesser than fairer skin. You just go to the whitening department of any pharmacy, and the first time I went looking for moisturizer in Singapore, I didn't even know what I was looking at. It was just white. I'm like, I don't. What and women are getting cancer on their skin from this whitening product. I'm like, this as a white person, it just seems ridiculous to me. But that's the way it is in this region. But we've got to move away from that way of thinking. We have to, we have to. Otherwise, the barbarity is going to get worse. That's my concern.
Well, and I think one of the concerns I've got is that people have this, well, what's in it for me mentality. And if there is not a clear, compelling answer to that, are they willing to make any changes, Now, there probably is something in it for them, because I fully believe we're not free until we're all free. If anyone is enslaved, none of us are free, right? And so, I think that the only way that we're going to create, this mindset that we care about others is we have to realize that I'm not doing it for them only. I'm doing it for all of us so that we can all feel this in the planet, this love, this care for other people, So I think there is something in it for them, but if they're looking for a selfish reason for it, I don't think they're going to find it. And if that's what is their main priority, is to do something for their own good, for themselves, then they may not be willing to change.
Yeah, we need to heal the soul of humanity, right?
Well, I think what we need to do is feed the body of humanity so that then the soul has time to thrive. I think really, if you think about the way the world works and how, if you think even just about wild animals, about yourself, when you are in want, when you are in shortage, when you don't have what you need to do, and when you're, let's say, in a home environment where a typhoon comes, blows away your home, and you've got to rebuild, and you're desperate for things, you can be this great community that comes together to solve things. But then what happens when you find that one thing that everyone needs? Is it going to be something you give to everybody else, or is it now the thing that you hold on for yourself? I've seen for myself, like the stories that go both ways, right? I think there are the people who feel that they have plenty and therefore they can share, like my friends from the Philippines, who are in that very situation I told you about. What they do is they're in such desperate situation that we send them food and we send them supplies. And what is almost what we feel at that moment a pity for is that we sent this to you to look after yourself, and instantly they share it with their whole community, right? Mm-hmm. And so they have that sense of abundance in a situation where they should not feel that. But I think like we're in Singapore, and in Singapore, if you drive through traffic, during any time, any kind of peak hour, you'd imagine that there was some kind of great, famine that was going on that was making us having to compete with each other. Because here in Singapore, we have everything, and it's in such great abundance. And, like everyone talks about the shortages around the world. I mean, Andrea, you were here, coming from a situation where you felt all these shortages showing up in terms of inflation and what have you and all that. And you come to Singapore and there isn't any of that. And yet here we're afraid someone's going to get in front of us in traffic. Someone's going to get in front of us in a queue. Someone's going to get that last, chicken wing order for the evening that I won't get. So it's a strange thing. I think we do have to, in some way, we have to be comfortable with what we have, so that we go like, you know what, there's enough for everything else to happen.
I think one of the things also that I hear a lot, and I'm kind of on my own personal mission to help change, is I get tired of hearing the word tolerating. And I pulse checked this across the world last year with one session I was doing for a client where probably about 300 people I pulse checked that question with, and was like, what does it mean to be, or how do you feel when people tolerate you? And there are a mix of ranges in there. Some people think it's a positive thing. Some people think it's like I'm a brick wall. And that's what I think, that, tolerating other people is not as good as it gets. And some people are promoting it. That's what we need to aim for. But that's not what we need to aim for. We need to aim for respecting and valuing and embracing diversity, not simply tolerating it. That's not enough. Right.
No, God, no. Wow, that's an interesting example.
That's just exactly what's being told to us over here, that, we need to tolerate a lot of things because we fall into the minority group. Coming from a multiracial country, some of us fall into minority groups, some of us fall into the bigger groups, and the word commonly used, as much as they advocate respect, trust, and all of that, but tolerate pops up very often.
Yeah.
I think
so you can
carry on. No, I was just going to say, I think the problem. The problem is, we talk about tolerating when we realize what toleration actually means is, it goes against the desire to be enough. Each of us wants to be enough, and somebody says, "No, you're not," but we're gonna tolerate you, and that's really, I think it's upsetting at a level that you might not be able to decipher straight away, but it just is gonna bug you in some way. You're like, no, I deserve it. I have a right to be who I am and believe what I have and all that. You're not right just because there's more of you.
Yeah. So once I was trying to, I like to visualize in circles. So I was trying to visualize sort of, what we need at the core of humanity to survive. And it's obviously air, water, and food, right? So air, you die in 3 minutes if you haven't got it. Water, you die in 3 days if you haven't got it. Food, you die in 3 weeks if you haven't got it, right? And I was like, but that it didn't feel enough. And I added a fourth element, and it's safety, dignity, and respect. Like to survive in the world, So the World Food Programme and the refugee program are pushing out some pretty horrific coverage about the Syrians who have been in refugee camps in Europe for, I think, 13 years. Now, Europe in the winter, the 50% of refugees are children. But Europe in the winter, and I think of the women, just dealing with things like menstruation. There's a hashtag menstruation matters. You can't even imagine as a woman what that experience is like. And you're living in these freezing conditions, and inflation and the cost of food is actually impacting the refugees' ability to feed themselves. Obviously, the cost of fuel is impacting their ability to keep themselves warm. And then you've got rich countries like the UK where more than 60% of the people are impacted by this. And there's stories of families deciding between staying warm and having food to eat, right? We're so out of balance around the world. And, minorities, people say minorities and women are considered a minority, which, as far as I'm concerned, we're equal with the fellas. But, there's so much that we just need a global mindset shift of respect towards our fellow humans and working out how we can take care of them, which we need to do if we want to solve the climate crisis as well. I did a climate courage on raising human consciousness. And I think it's the fundamental thing. We all need to rise and we need to share the message. I'll just give you another example of a terrible story I read the other day. 1 in 5 children in the Philippines is being utilized by their own parents and families to do sex videos, which then men in Europe are paying to watch these children being raped and molested. And the families are doing this, and it's becoming so commonplace and so accepted because everybody's doing it. And you think this entire generation of children are growing up where they're the people that they should be able to trust the most, putting them in this harm's way. And it's a sickening thing to read, but if we could raise all children and they all knew that they were safe and loved, we changed the world. And you think of how many children all over the world, all different societies, they're not remotely safe and they have no feeling that they're loved. So we've got this generation of kids that will go into society who are so harmed and have experienced so much trauma that we just keep extending the problems. And I think if we could get to the heart of what the real problems are within humanity, maybe we can solve it. But greed, of course, is the driver, but greed is also the cause of the problems that we face in the world today. So, and no one can win that war. So, yeah, it's complicated.
I think the biggest problem that we have in the world is a deficit of attention. As in because we have so much to look at, so many things to look at. I mean, you mentioned this. It's important to me. You talked about the big flood that happened in Pakistan and how the world's media about 3/4 of them didn't even notice it happened, at least immediately. It is a problem with attention. We have too many things happening that we're trying to, it's competing for attention. And the human mind isn't designed to keep track of all of that. I mean, like if anyone just tried to keep track of this whole conversation, they would be overwhelmed already. if they get to your weekend reads and try to capture the whole thing just on one edition of that, and it's going to be overwhelming. Take the whole year into context, and now it's just an impossible thing to try to look at. So the human brain is the mind. I'm stepping into Grant's area here, but it's able to pay attention to the singular things. I mean, you hear about one person, or you kick your toe and you can suddenly realize the pain of that, but you can't quite get your head around the 5,000 people who died in a big in a big war. Your brain just goes, okay, I kind of get that, but my toe hurts more. So there's this thing about attention. I heard this from a doctor on one of our the webinars that I produced, and he just talked about the importance of things like public health, and it comes down to the simple ability to speak, the simple ability to tell people about this, because we need people who have the ability to be advocates of these things, to come up in a way so that they are relevant and they are interesting as well, and they don't just sound like someone just yabbering on about something, because that can happen. Vegans, but you know what I mean? I mean, that's what I'm trying to say. There is something about this attention deficit and how we get around it, and how we train ourselves to get better at the big problems.
Yeah, I think one other thing too was coming through my mind, listening to you, Joe, and listening to Andrea talk about this and that story you told about the Philippines. That this mindset of abundance, I think, is where we need to get people to shift to. I think that we've got so many people in our brains are hardwired to think competition and think scarcity, that there's only one job and I'm going to compete to get that job. And so therefore I'm going to dislike the other people who are fighting for my job. And I think if we get out of this scarcity mentality, that we get into an abundance mentality, that everybody can get what they want. And just because you win does not mean that I lose. You can win, I can win, and everybody can win. And we get this abundance mindset. I think we're just going to create more value for everybody around the world. And that's going to help us to get out of these, in-group, out-group biases and anything else that might lead us to have negative views of anyone else.
Yeah. The othering needs to be addressed, right? So, especially if you're hearing yourself othering a group of people who are weak politically or in numbers, then I think we all need to start checking ourselves, because the group that has the least power to fight back are often the targets, especially from politicians and the media. And I think we've got to stop the othering and look at, we're all in this together, and we've got to start finally recognizing who's responsible. But I also think we need to get back to societal basics. And, you were saying education and health, safety and dignity, access to clean water, food, all of those things. And we need to look at making sure globally we take care of our own. Bavani, do you want to say some final points?
I think we're just riding on abundance, right? Abundance is just not about me and mine, because whatever it is, if you think about systems thinking, whatever we do, whether it's good or bad, I mean, in Hindu we say it's karma. The good that you do, it hits us back in a good way. The not so good things that you do also hits us back. And the bigger picture here is every action would impact, if not us, the generations to come. And I think that's something people conveniently forget while they do things or go around daily basis. So riding on abundance, whatever we do in abundance, it would come back in abundance as well. And if we are not careful, it may not come in a way that we are ready for, or it may just take us to, I don't know, another pandemic, another big hit in whichever way. So the mindset should not be me and mine any longer. It should be us. It's all of us. We are all in this together. No one's getting away.
It's so critical. All right. What is keeping you guys distracted at the moment?
I'll be very honest. The announcement of the cabinet for me now.
Yeah, right.
That's happening. That's happening right now as we speak, right? This program right now is you're still waiting for the results, right?
Yeah, because what I know before we came in was that the list has gone to the king, the Agong, and it's just a matter of an announcement. So yeah, literally that's keeping me distracted at this point.
And the word is it's supposed to be a smaller cabinet than usual. Is that gonna? You think it's gonna happen?
It's rumors, but really, I'm not sure, because they got to accommodate a lot of people right now because of the coalition that just happened. So that's another suspense, like who takes lead, who gets critical roles, who gets this and who gets that. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
the big question right now.
All right, Grant.
Yeah, I think one thing keeping me distracted right now, it's a show on Netflix. I put it on the playlist maybe could have been 3 or 4 months ago. Maybe I added it to the playlist, but never watched it. So then just a couple of days ago, I decided to watch. I watched 3 episodes of it. It was that engrossing. It's a show called Song Exploder. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it or seen it. And I'm a musician. I see Joe's getting a thumbs up. What they do is they take a famous song that was, they interview the composers, the artists, the engineers that were involved in it, and what do the lyrics mean, how was the song created, and it's really quite fascinating. I mean, episode 3 just blew me away because it was REM's song "Losing My Religion," which to me was one of my favorite songs of all time, and that was 30 years ago. And just having them reflect back on what that means to them, and just hearing the song in different ways as they remixed parts of it together, and just hearing the richness of it and what they were thinking and at that moment in their life, and why write the song this way, not that way. It's just fascinating. Song Exploder. Definitely recommend it.
All right, definitely have a look at that, Joe.
Yeah, a Song Exploder, by the way, is on the really deep end of the nerd pool. And if you want to go to the high diving board and check out the rest of it, Song Exploder comes from a podcast by the same name as well, with the same producer, Ricky Wei. You'll enjoy that for months and months. Okay, for myself, 2 things are keeping me distracted right now. One is I'm getting ready for my next trading course. I'm just talking to students, getting ready. That starts in about 2 weeks. And the other thing that's keeping me distracted is, or at least I'm redistracting myself in that way right now, is I'm going back to magic. I've always been a huge fan of magic, and then in recent years more about mentalism, because I love the magic of the mind. I love how that we're able to create these amazing effects with no props and just using your thought patterns and the ideas that we put in your head. So I'm going back to a bit more of that, just consuming some content in that direction. And I'm watching a very old series, 7 seasons of The Mentalist, which is it was very popular at its time, and I don't know whether it's aged as well as it would hope it has, but yeah, I'm catching up with The Mentalist. So I'm on episode 12 of season 1 currently, with only 7.5 seasons more to go. 6.5 more seasons to go.
Still on the hunt for Red John.
Yes, still on the hunt for Red John. There we go. We have someone here who's a Mentalist fan.
I remember watching it years ago. So, yeah, so my distraction from a Netflix perspective, trying to finish the new season of The Crown, it was presented as potentially bad for Charles at this point. I think it's pretty balanced. I think it sort of shows the complexity of the situation in a way where no one looks good and everyone looks good. It's just, they're just human beings living an extraordinary life. I'm going to the Natural Disasters Expo in Singapore next week to look at its floods, fire, storms, and there was one other category. So, I'm looking forward to seeing that, because one of my big concerns around climate is the adaptation plans and activities are nowhere near where they need to be. And I think it's going to put a lot of citizens in a lot of countries at great risk. So I'm looking forward to going and have a dig around. If any of you guys are in Singapore, come along. It's free to go.
I love this section of the program where we go from Song Exploder to World Exploder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we're going to have our final no-show in a couple of weeks. I'm just trying to check the date. 16th, is it the 16th? For the year.
That, yeah.
Should be 16th,
yeah, the 16th, yeah. And then we'll have a break until mid-January. But Grant, thank you so much for coming back. Really appreciate it. And Bavani.
Thank you. Anytime you need me to fill in for anybody, let me know.
Yeah, no, I love it. And Bavani, thanks so much for agreeing to be a guest. I know I kind of had to twist your arm a bit.
My pleasure. It's been exciting being here.
Yeah. Of course, I want to say, as always, thank you very much once again to Andrea for pulling it all together, because you've had a truly busy week. I know you've been in Singapore this past few days, rushed back, got all the work done, and you have it out. If you haven't yet, go and check out Andrea's Weekend Reads. It is a really, really good way. It's mental hygiene. Get in there and get the rest of the roughage you need for a good diet of news.
but you don't need to read it all. You don't need to be overwhelmed by it, right? It's all
I'll
packaged
just read the
up.
headlines. Yeah.
Read the headlines. People tell me they read the headlines and it really helps them sort of get a grasp of everything that's going on. I'm doing it to stop the overwhelm, but also because I think it's important to pay attention to information that matters. And that's what I'm trying to do, just be consistently delivering something. You know, it's a labor of love, but it's important. It's an important time for humanity. And I think we need to move into our hearts now so that we can lift humanity up to get ready to face the multiple crises that we face. So thanks, guys. And we'll see you on the 16th. Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, folks.
Bye.